Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is August 17, year 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I'd like to personally welcome Corky Goss to the live chat, Tropiskunk, Piper Fogel, Corky Goss. Oh, I'm sorry, I already mentioned your name. It's okay. Ayape and Tropiskunk. And today, this is going to be a talk about something that most of us know about, so I'm not going to belabor the definitions of what the Mandela Effect is. I think it went global, and that in itself kind of really interested me. That something that mundane can circle the globe and be discussed in such a passionate fashion. And in preparing for this talk, hi Biomancer Perspective. In preparing for this talk, I checked Amazon. I suspected that there would be a lot of literature on this, and there certainly is. And if you have happened to read one of those books, please leave a comment down below. I don't know if I'll be able to catch it on the live stream because I'm not always looking at it. But if you read something that is decent, I looked at some of the descriptions, and most of it seems to put it charitably, pedestrian. I have read some academic literature, and some of it's pedestrian as well. But that's really not the focus of today's talk. Today's talk is to try, I have a twofold purpose. One is, most of you in the live chat probably share this with me. In fact, most people who subscribe to my channel, I have a quality audience here, might share the same approach here. Well, we're all pretty much tired of hearing about mind control, right? We've read the literature. It's been out there for years. It goes back before even John Marx. There's been a lot of material out there, and it's just a lot of regurgitation. And yes, keep reading it, keep studying it. That's the foundational literature. But my whole emphasis, not just here, but in general, my career, my approach is to push out the boundaries, is just take it further, right? You don't want to get up and become a human. If you're a musician, you don't want to be a human jukebox. When you're learning your craft, yes, you learn all the tunes, you play the cover tunes and whatever. Van Halen started that way. They played all the top 40 hits to their famous parties that they'd have in the past, well, throughout Los Angeles. They were infamous, but they mastered their craft by studying all the different music. And then, of course, the rest. They came up with some incredibly inventive original material. So I'm assuming that most of you who are watching are on that same path. If you're not already there, you're looking to move beyond the same old, right? This is what Jimi Hendrix did. I was watching a little bit of his. He studied the blues. He learned from all the great masters, from the Delta blues up through the urban, Chicago, New York scene. This guy's from Seattle, right? And he traveled the whole Chitlin circuit before he broke through. And then, of course, the rest of the story. He took it further. So these are the types of individuals. Typically, I look at artists. In particular, intellectuals, it's a little bit less easy to find out how they're progressing, and there are very few people who are moving beyond the same old in writing. But when they do, it becomes really obvious. Same with filmmakers, right? So that's what we aspire to. At least I do, and I think most of us who want to make an original contribution want to push it out. So enough about that. Today I was going to promise you, and I am going to hopefully fulfill that promise, a new look at the so-called Mandela Effect. And we're going to abandon all these generic notions of mind control. Once Andy Jacobson started writing those books, I knew, okay, we reached the zenith of where we're going to take it, right? So I'm not going to use that term. I'm just using it now, and we're going to dispense with it. Instead, I'm going to look at the so-called Mandela Effect as a specific example of what we call today, almost matter-of-factly, what we call today brain science or neuroscience. And what I am seeing here, and this is more speculative, and speculation is okay. It's called hypothesis testing, right? We put a speculative idea out there, we put a hypothesis, and we test it against reality. That's how science is done. That's how we live our life, really. We're always kind of putting out probes there and getting some sort of feedback. So I'm suggesting that the Mandela effect today, I'll just say it right off the top, is more than one of these mind control psyops. It is an intervention at the level of this new emphasis, or I should say renewed, because it goes back to the 1940s, right? Now I'll get to the history in a moment. It goes back to the 1940s. It's not new. But this is a specific example, that is the Mandela effect, is a specific example of this huge infusion of money into hacking the brain or understanding the brain functions. And if you think that that mandate, right, that all that money, the hundreds of millions, if not billions by now, all that money is to help in a sort of a beneficent therapeutic fashion, then you have a long way to go to understand the larger world. We already know at its simplest, these technologies, medical or otherwise, always have multifold purposes. One is the benevolent, which I recognize, but the other one's the dark purpose. And that's what I'm going to be exploring today, because the benevolent part can take care of itself, right? But that's usually how it's sold to us, however. It sneaks in through the back door, right? The dark science, the dark medicine, right? Now, yesterday I produced a 4-minute reading. I'm doing more readings these days, if you might notice, and I'm posting them on this channel. And it's on the so-called Mandela Effect, named after the long-term political prisoner, Nelson Mandela, and later he became the president of South Africa, even after having endured all those years of hardship. And international pressure helped to free him and to bring him to international prominence, a shining beacon on what oppression can bring. Now, I know South Africa is going through some difficult times right now. And the people who ran South Africa, these are the mining, the usual suspects, right? The banks, central banks. The people who ran South Africa under apartheid are still there, right? So the revolution is not completely in place yet. But Mandela is an icon, is a marker, a historical marker for a new beginning for African peoples of all backgrounds, by the way, including people who originate in Europe, have been there for 5 or 6 generations. And that's partly why I'm doing this. And I think that's partly why the Mandela effect was created. And this is a secondary point here, but I think it's also important. And I just thought of it as I'm talking, right? But the second part of the creation, the engineering of the Mandela effect, is to trivialize Nelson Mandela's political contribution, right? Not just to South African history, but to world history, right? Trivialization is usually how it starts out. And if it doesn't really succeed in demeaning a person, then, well, first of all, they try to ignore him. They put him in prison. They try to ignore you. Then once you're getting prominence, they'll try to trivialize it, play it down, or, oh, yeah, everybody knows that. Yeah, been there, done that. And then, of course, if you make further inroads, then they'll, try to eliminate you politically or physically. I haven't posted that 4-minute reading yet. I wanted to do this talk first, then you can go back and check it out. This is a more of an elaboration of these insights that I was developing over the past couple of days. But in that 4-minute piece, I suggest even then that the Mandela effect is not just a run-of-the-mill psyop. It might be a trial run. It might be a proof of concept for what is today called neuroscience or brain science, not just for information. And I noticed myself, I'm not really aware of it as I'm doing it. I'm dealing more with science right now. And I have posted about an hour ago, a couple hours perhaps, another, well, it's a longer one. It's a reading. It's 23 minutes. and it's on my channel. It's titled Panspermia, the Origin of Life on Earth. And I ask myself this question, why am I doing these types of posts, and why am I interested in science in specific, whether it's talking about the origins of life, as in directed panspermia, or in this case, psychology or psychiatric or medical science. Well, that's one way for me. I'm answering my own question. This is one way, method of me, my approach sideways, how to address the current medical tyranny that we are facing right now. It's a way of addressing it obliquely without getting deplatformed on YouTube. I think it's, and that's why I value my sophisticated quality audience, the people in the live chat and people who watch this. It's probably why I have so few subscriptions, because people want to watch Dr. Todd Grande. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. I like to take cheap shots at people that deserve it, right? Because somebody asked me, how come you're so mean to all these people? Hey, man, it's fair. You want to throw down in the area of ideas or music or whatever, athletics. You want to throw down, then you better be prepared to take your licks, and that holds true for me as well. And I've been known to give as good as I get. So it's all fair. That's how we do it. That's how we roll. This is how the world works. We're always rubbing against each other. That's how it's called creative tension, right? So don't get too upset. I'm sure he's a nice guy, Dr. Todd Grande, and all these other clowns that are on YouTube. And I guess that's what really vexes me the most, that people, because I'm on YouTube, put me in the same category as people like Robert Seifer or Dr. Todd Grande or whoever else is pretending to present expert opinion and analysis. And maybe you think I'm a fool as well. That's okay. That's cool. Anyway, so watch that panspermia one, because it's about a thinker that I really value. His name's Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe. And maybe that'll be an introduction to his work. He's writing relentlessly in this area. And I think perhaps that these ideas of panspermia might help us out of our current predicament that is currently being controlled by big pharma and big science and big academia. So we have to use some of the research that comes out of academia, including that of he's knighted, Sir Fred Hoyle, who's a collaborator of Professor Wickramasinghe. There's plenty of literature within the field itself that'll help us move the ball forward, so to speak. We do not have to depend on Alex Jones alone, and we do not have to depend on David Icke. They've done great service to us, but they've also assisted in putting us in a little box, right? A box of just crazy conspiracy people. And I think we're overcoming it. And not to say that I'm taking us there, but my area that I draw from is much larger than what you're seeing on YouTube, that's for sure. And you're going to get a taste of that today. Now, before I go on, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why it's dark out here. It's for the past week been overcast. I thought it was geoengineering. We get a lot of that up here. I'm in Northern California, which is quite different than Southern California. That's Los Angeles, San Diego and all that. It's like a different scene up here. With the exception of San Francisco and the East Bay, which is a country unto themselves. It's the People's Republic of the East Bay. But once you get out of these conurbations, right, the East Bay or Los Angeles, California is a normal state. It's a red state. It overwhelmingly voted for President Trump in the most recent election, but you know what happened nationally, right? That's what the real California is about. But anyway, the real California is being bombarded by a series of fires over the last, 5 years, maybe 6 years. And we have one going on right now. It's called the Dixie Fire. And I was thinking about this. In California, we're the only people that I know of in the country, maybe in the world, that name our fires. They are so frequent. We give little names to our huge, massive thousands, tens of thousands of acres, some of it pristine acreage, and a lot of it homes, unfortunately, and that's maybe part of the plan. But we give them names like the campfire, the Dixie fire, and on, right? Just in the same way we name our earthquakes, right? The Loma Prieta earthquake. So we're very much used to so-called natural disaster, which seem to be more and more of the engineering sort, to the point where we name them. But I wanted to point out the fact that there's a guy who's been apprehended. His name's, I can read his name because it's public information. Whether he's guilty or not, that's for the courts to decide, but he's been arrested, so it's part of the papers. Yeah, I'm not trying to dox him. His name's Gary Stephen Maynard. He's listed at age 47. And what is of interest to me is that, and he's going to go into the Collegiate Gothic podcast that I'm working on right now. I'm up to about 75 profiles right now. I want to get up to 100 so I can just wrap them off one by one. So when I put it on iTunes, people can binge watch it, right? Anyway, Gary Stephen Maynard is described in the press as a professor. Now, I take exception to that, not because of snob appeal, but the fact, I think what's happening here is that the mainstream press is trying to smear the professoriate. Now, whatever you think about them, right, most of them are SJWs, even in the sciences now. And most of them are following the globalist, central bankers script, whether unwittingly or consciously, right? So we don't have, me as well. So we don't have a lot of sympathy for professors. What's happening now is the PSYOP to stigmatize that whole professional group, move them aside, just like they've moved aside policemen, just like they're moving aside teachers, right? K through 12. And all other institutions that ground any society, including American society. So the professoriate's going to get it soon. And I'm not gloating about it. I'm not happy about it, even though the professoriate turned its back on me, right? But here I am on YouTube with a much larger audience, by the way. In a week, I'd probably be able to lecture to, let's see, well, in the old days, I'd do hundreds before they took me out of the large lecture classes that were becoming too popular. But I get hundreds, if not, over 1,000, which sounds like a lot in YouTube terms, but in terms of teaching, it's a good number. So YouTube, you could suppress me all you want. My message is going to get out, and because people who are watching are going to multiply it as well. It's a multiplier effect. Anyway, Gavin, I won't belabor this much longer, but Maynard says he was a quote unquote professor. We're their lecturers, is really the technical term, but he's lectured at colleges in Santa Clara University. That's Silicon Valley, by the way. He's also lectured at Sonoma State University, not far from me, and other areas. He comes from the Midwest. His past is a little bit kind of mysterious. Maybe you can go in on his background, but I think he's an operative of some sort, even though he might know of it himself. And here's where he fits into today's discussion. He might even be an operative who's fallen into this neuroscience control grid. Fire starters, right? The arsonists, the profile of them is that they're bedwetters and they have issues and, sexuality, impotence and whatnot. So there's a new type of fire starter that's been created. And they're now seeming to pick these semi-employed casual laborers in academia. They're called lecturers. They don't have a job. They don't have a full-time tenured job. So maybe they're bittered and upset, justifiably so, because it's mostly therapists and counselors that are being hired in the university. And that's part of that's the true Mandela effect, is that the university is being taken over by behavioral scientists, not researchers, but therapists. They're the one who are implementing all these programs like so-called critical race theory. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to have a woman, Asian American, Chinese American, who has answered my invitation to appear as a guest, and she's in California, Southern California, and she's going to be addressing specifically the California state legislation mandating so-called critical race theory in K through 12, and the university's already been doing. It's coming out of the university, so that's also going to go into the Collegiate Gothic Files podcast. So look forward to a guest, maybe as soon as next week, and I think you'll find her fascinating. I won't give you her name. I want you to watch our interaction here, because she's on YouTube, and I want you to just see that and say, well, I've already seen her. I don't need. No. It's going to be an interesting conversation, and even the people who have been my guests said, "Wow, that was a really good talk." I came with a prepared, canned, approach, but you asked me some questions that drew out areas that, because I want some spontaneity here. I don't want to read from a script. I don't want to play written music. I want to, again, the music analogy, I want to improvise here on stage. So let's talk about the Mandela Effect. You know about Curious George, you know about the Flintstones and about the Looney Tunes, right? But in preparing for this talk, I came across a reference to the film Inception. It came out in 2010, and it's directed by Christopher Nolan. Hang on to that name. Put it in your short-term memory. And the film stars Leonardo DiCaprio. Well, I think most of us know where he comes from and what he's about. But anyway, so I'll just leave that aside. Christopher Nolan, I'm really interested in him. I've been interested in him for a number of years. So I went to Netflix to see the movie, and if I needed to, I'll rent it, right? Because I feel like I need to see everything. Even if it's a bad movie, if it's on topic, I need to see it. Wastes a lot of time, but I feel it's my responsibility as a researcher. So I went into the Netflix site, and I saw they have these notations down there, fortunately, so I don't have to repeat my mistake and rent them again. But I saw that I rented the film Inception back in 2011, and it's about memory. So I thought it's ironic. I'm giving a talk on engineered memory and an implanted memory, and Inception has that theme. And I couldn't remember watching a Christopher Nolan film. So I said, you know what? In general, whether it's Christopher Nolan or not, I tend to forget bad movies. Sometimes I don't even remember their premises. Maybe that's to make room for good movies if you subscribe to that storage space analogy. But I think it's because it just has zero visceral impact on me that I don't really remember a lot about Christopher Nolan. And yes, I know he's a big time director. And yes, I'm going to, and maybe you will too. I hope you do. We can exchange insights on this, not information. I don't have that kind of time, but we'll exchange insights on Christopher Nolan and where he comes from. Check it out. He comes from an elite background, London. Yeah, I think Oxford or something, maybe Cambridge, one of the top schools. And, I think he might be an asset, and I told you I'm not going to talk about mind control, so I won't even mention Tavistock, right? You know the backstory, all right? So check out Christopher Nolan. So I forgot about the movie. I'm not going to watch it again. I'll look at my notes. I usually do take notes on all these films that I've seen, especially if I'm researching it. However, I do have excellent, in fact, total recall, to echo another film, right? 1990, Paul Verhoeven, by the way. Now, there's a director whose films I do remember because he's a good director. And I don't think he has an algorithm in his films that makes you forget what you just saw. That's what I think what's going on. I'm just joking. This is what's going on with Christopher Nolan. He's got an algorithm in there. As soon as you finish watching a Christopher Nolan film, you'll forget about it, right? It wipes clean your mind so that you will go back and rent it again, or you'll accidentally buy it a second time. That's no, definitely. Hopefully, I'm kidding, right? Or maybe it's true. I don't know. But I do recall seeing students at the campus where I used to work, UC Davis. This is around 2015 and 2016. I have a vivid memory of seeing students like at the coffee shop or even sitting on a bench or something with these giant, thick books, right? And that's pretty rare. You don't see students these days carrying books around. They're not humping anything but maybe the laptop, right? But here they are. They're this giant textbook, and they're looking. So I had to like check it out. I kind of sidle up to them or look. I'm getting a coffee, waiting in line, and seeing what the title is of these massive books. And textbooks these days are really expensive, ladies and gentlemen. So expensive that a lot of students, especially in the sciences area, have to rent books every quarter, or they rent them every semester. Of course, heaven forbid that they'd ever put them online, right? Because the publishing companies need to, because they're all part of the Mandela industrial academic complex, right? So I noticed that the titles of these books are always about neuroscience, right? Elements of neuroscience. So it's being pushed really hard. And I know this is around 2015, 2016. So sure enough, in doing the prep work for today's talk, in looking at the history of neuroscience, that's when the big money started to flow in down to the university level, right? And the university agenda, you know, about critical race theory and all the others, you know, GLBTQ before that. And after critical race theory that has been played out, I'm telling you, it's going to be disability studies, because we're going to have a disabled population. That's what the 2021 Tokyo Olympics are about. It's the sort of the introduction to deformity in everyday society. 9 months from now, you're going to see a lot of deformed babies being born to elite athletes from all over the world. This is one of my statements that I made earlier. So we're going to see disability studies later, but right now it's neuroscience, it's brain science. And I'll remind you that it was the former, quote unquote, former CIA chief, George H.W. Bush, right? He was president back then. He declared in 1990, he declared the 90s to be the decade of the brain. That's the phrase. 1990s were to become the decade of the brain. And it was going to run into 1999. So I don't know, what's the 2000? What's that the decade of? The decade of the virus? Well, you know, or maybe it's some other organ. Maybe it's the decade of the groin, or what used to be the groin, because the groin has been engineered out of the picture here. So that's when the public announcement, and I'll use the phrase, the revelation of the method, that's when it was announced. And then we have another CIA creation, a synthetic creation by the name of Barack Hussein Obama. He was president, right? Groomed from youth and then put in there, slotted right in there, right? And so he proposes in 2014 a $434 million budget. This is a proposal that would fund his so-called Brain Initiative. That's capital BRAIN. It's an acronym for something that I don't want to look up now. It's very clever cryptonyms, right? That's part of the word magic that these people indulge themselves in order to laugh at us, right? It's the Brain Initiative, 400,000. That's not a lot of money, ladies and gentlemen. You know, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure hundreds of millions, if not billions, have already been plunged in. Only, less than a decade later. We're deep into it, in other words. And I tell you this from looking at all the research, the academic research, laboratory research that I found on this. I couldn't even scratch the surface on it, right? And it's manifesting itself, by the way, in areas that you might not be aware of. There is something, I'll give you this right here. First, this is the first mention of it in all of YouTube. Can you imagine that? This is it. The YouTube universe is so huge, but this is the first time that you will hear it from someone of my ilk tell you that there's something out there called neuromarketing. Yes. Maybe I'll get to it at the very end of this talk. If I don't, it's not going to disappoint me too much, because I have so much more to give to you here. It's called the Brain Initiative. And that's around, as I mentioned, that's around the time when I saw the students walking around with these giant mega textbooks on neuroscience. So I knew something was afoot. And sure enough, I looked at the promotional letter that was drafted by Obama's people. It has his name on it, but as you know, presidents don't really have to do any work. They have experts who do everything for them, right? So since its launch in 2013, really, who are some of the names? And you'll recognize them right off the bat. So I won't even have to, because I have a sophisticated audience, I don't have to explain who these are. But who are some of the federal agencies that are involved? Yes, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, that are known as DARPA. Also, the National Institutes of Health, NIH. Does that sound familiar to you? I'm sorry for laughing, man. We're in deep trouble, and that's why I do these talks. National Science Foundation, NSF, Intelligence Advanced Research Projects, IARPA, right? That's one I didn't know about. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, right? We know about that one. So there's all these different federal agencies that are involved, but here are the foundations. You know, the foundations are the conduits for the black budget, right? It has nothing to do with the color or ethnicity, just for the critical race theorists out there who want to get me delisted. It has to do with the fact that it's a secret budget, right? It's a backdoor budget. The major foundations are involved, private research institutions are involved, and companies, Fortune 500 companies, public companies, as well as private companies are involved. Howard Hughes Medical Institute, you've heard of them. Allen Institute for Brain Science, I'm sure you know about them. Kavli Foundation, I don't know who Kavli are, K-A-V-L-I, sorry. Probably some bankers, you know, maybe they're front people. I don't know, the Simon Foundation, is that Norton Simon? GE, GlaxoSmithKline, on and on and on. You get the idea who's behind the Brain Initiative. And like you, I'm skeptical right from the jump. We should be by now. What we've learned over just in the past few years, not few years, but the last 18 months to 2 years on this one particular episode, that's the good thing about the Grind, is the learning curve for the American and the international public has been very rapid. So these names are much more out in the open now. Thanks to the hurry up strategy, the Hail Mary, the 2-minute warning in football terms that these companies and federal agencies and globalist entities are engaged in, because they know we're on to them. Okay, so you know about that. You know about these people. Excuse me while I wet my whistle. But what about back channel funding? Back channel funding, more specifically, back channel cultural funding, right? I've already mentioned Christopher Nolan and his contacts, his origins, perhaps even with the intelligence community, psychological intelligence and whatnot. That's an example. He is one of their assets, I believe, but you're going to have to confirm that independently. I'll try to find out. Back channel, I'll give you some examples here, but first of all, let me address a question that someone put to me, and I handle these comments with respect. My responses may be on the irreverent side, or you might even consider them to be mean. But if you're going to come at me with some stupid ass material, then all bets are off, as far as I'm concerned, right? It's Elbow City under the basket. Someone's asked me about, and this was a good question, it was legitimate. He asked me about the British group Muse after watching one of my talks, and he says, well, you know, they're up there. They're giving us the entire lowdown on where we're heading. And I said, oh, it's BS, because I checked out Muse. I've been there. I've even bought their CDs. I hate the music, but like I told you, I force myself to look at bad movies and listen to bad music, even though it's well produced and slick. That doesn't mean it's good. It still can be bad. And Muse is a good example of that. And the lead guitarist, he's so full, I don't even think he writes his own material. Matt Bellamy might be sort of a Virginia Benassi type. He's sort of a placeholder. Most of these cats are, by the way. Whether they're a musician, frontmen for these current music groups, or authors like your Annie Jacobson, or many of your professors have underpaid grad students who do the work, and they slap their name on it, right? Alan Dershowitz is a good example when he taught at Harvard, because it became painfully evident what a crappy writer he is, because I got his most recent book. I think he probably had to write it himself because he's no longer teaching at Harvard, and he can't use all these very intelligent and well-schooled Harvard law students to do his research and writing for him. And they do that at Yale too. I know this. I'm from that world. The real big shots do. Drones like me, little spuds, potato people, I have to do everything myself, which I prefer anyway, because I live it, right? It comes from me. It doesn't come from outside myself. So to put it nicely, Matt Bellamy and everybody else in the world has heard about David Icke, and I have the utmost respect for David Icke. I went to one of his talks in Marin County several years ago. I have most of his books, including The Answer, and apparently he has another book after that. So this is not a slam against David Icke. It's a slam against the phenomenon of people who listen to your Alex Jones or all the mind control people or David Icke, which it's become like a game now. It's become Trivial Pursuit. Only conspiracy and mind control is the topic. It's the theme. And I'm not interested in that. You know why? Because if we don't do more serious, in-depth work, we're all going to feel the consequences of being distracted by the playtime. I hope you know what this is no longer playtime. And by the way, I read the stuff. I read the stuff about aliens. I read the stuff about Antarctica. I read that someone suggested that I needed to read Joseph P. Farrell on the Nazis, right? And I looked in Amazon, and I know there, like Amazon, it tells Netflix. I bought that book back in 2011. Been there, done that. I'm up on my material. I'll read everything. And Joseph Farrell, by the way, is one of the good ones. So is David Icke. I have the highest regard for them. But that's not what I do here, okay? It's very frustrating to be put in that bag. Their little market, the niche that they've created for themselves, more power to them. If you love them, great, go for it. But I'm not one to follow the crowd, even though it's a crowd of independent types, which is a contradiction in terms, isn't it? A herd, independent types. So that's where it's headed, and I think that's really dangerous. Our own group, if you want to call it, our own tribe of dissenters and of indie types are now coming back to us as a virus from outer space, right? Infecting our brains with material that's 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. So let's move on ahead. Sorry for the rant again. You're going to hear it from time to time, as you probably already have. So we already know that culture has been hijacked. I don't need to belabor the point. There are any number of books that show us how not just the popular culture, and people have made careers out of it. They're saying, oh yeah, did you know that Stanley Kubrick was blah, 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 and this and this and this, and Eyes Wide Shut, blah, 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 woof, woof. But we know that elite culture has also been hijacked by federal agencies, funders, private institutions, foundations, and of course the university. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go and mention. You'll have to take my word for it, but there are a number of books that I'm not going to cite. All right, Cultural Cold War, Finks. Those are two for you to check out, right? And by the way, speaking of the popular culture, I keep forgetting to mention, I'm one of the pioneers in looking at television as part of this entire complex. I've written not one, but two whole books, academic books that are highly readable, right, on television, because I am a product of television. I'm of the television generation. I grew up on sitcoms. I grew up on Walter Cronkite. I saw the Beatles live when they was on tape delay because I'm in the West Coast. But I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show when it came out. I lived through the Vietnam War. I saw the evacuation of HQ in Saigon, the fall of Saigon. And a great critic by the name of Michael Arlen wrote a book on that. He wrote a whole series of articles, and he compiled it in an anthology called The Television War, speaking specifically about the Vietnam War. All right, so I've done this work. That doesn't mean I'm better than anybody else out there. There's tons of people. My mentor, Fred McDonald, incredible. He's written several books on the television Western and on and on. I don't need to cite him. But I'm telling you, I've been looking at this for years and years and years. I made it my professional career, and you can do it too. I put out a special recruitment. Not that I'm going to be in a supervisory program. You do it on your own. But I, as a researcher, would like to know what you guys out there who have grown up with video games, what you think about all the different video games. I'll give you a specific. Are there video games out there that play with memory and perception and flashbacks and flash forwards or amnesia, like a lot of these films, like that are being done by Christopher Nolan or there's any number of them. I can't even count. There's tons of movies like that. Are there any video games like that? I'd like to see you do a talk on that so I can learn from you, because I didn't grow up with video games and there's no way I'm ever going to catch up, and I don't want to. I like to watch films from the 1930s. I've been watching a lot of musicals and pre-code movies, watching movies when they were witty and had dialogue and beautiful women in nice fashions and clothes, and men who were, even though they might have been gay, a lot of the stars were gay, but they weren't flaunting it like, oh, you've got to be a flamer in order to be real, right? That's 1930s anyway. But I found out there's even a movie called The Mandela Effect 2019. I haven't found it. It's not on Netflix. But again, I'll have to watch it. I have a suspicion it's going to be bad, but I need to watch it. Total Recall. Oh, yeah, 1990. I think that was a prelude. By the way, can I do a digression? I think it's an important one here, because we're talking about neuroscience and the institutions that do neuroscience. Total Recall, 1990, Paul Verhoeven. I might be mispronouncing his name, right? He adapted it from by the way, I think the original director that was hired for that project was none other than the Canadian director, David Cronenberg, right? And I think he stuck too close to the original short story by Philip K. Dick. It was an adaptation of a Philip K. Dick short story called I Can Remember It Wholesale for You, right? That's the short story. And he's now legendary. He used to write for the pulps. He'd write by the word, all the cheap magazine. Now he's a literary figure, right? So, and I'm telling you this is because if you are a writer or researcher, as long as you can write and practice your trade, your craft, and refine your skills, that's good, right? Just like playing cover tunes in a band to get to learn your skills. Just same with writing. Get your material out there to any venue. I've done that. Because that's what I am. And when I'm doing my craft, I don't think it's a waste of time. And someday I'll spend some time talking about all the crappy writing jobs I had before I got to write my good stuff, right? And I don't regret it. Even when I was paying my dues, I said, this is going to benefit me somewhere down the road. I'm going to make sure that it does. Anyway, Philip Dick I'm not comparing myself to him, but he was in the same boat. He wrote for what used to be called the pulps. By the time he came around, they were no longer called pulp fiction, but it was mass market types of fiction that serious academic types would never dream, except when they're under their blanket reading at home their true, pleasures. But they would never admit to be Philip K. Dick fans. And now it's cool to be what they're called. They're called dickheads, right? Fans of Philip Dick. And I mention this is because Philip Dick, as a child, was put through one of these neuroscience programs at the University of California, San Francisco. It's not in Berkeley, it's in San Francisco, it's across the bay. And this is where it fits into today's talk. Recently, there have been hundreds of millions of dollars going into the University of California, San Francisco. In what area? Brain science, neuroscience. Philip Dick, at an early stage, was a wunderkind, a wonder child, high IQ individual who was taken, I guess it was his mother, or he might have been recruited. I can't remember the particulars. I've read about 3 or 4 biographies of Philip K. Dick, And this is where I'm getting it from memory, so it's kind of hazy. But he was taken to one of these testing areas, one of these clinics. And by the way, these neuropsychiatric clinics are more plentiful today in 2021 than they were back in the days of Charles Manson, where Operation Chaos, right? The free clinics in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, or in LA, or in New York, right? What were those about? Read Chaos. That's the title of the book. I can't remember the author's name. He's good. I keep going back to it. There are more clinics like that today in 2021 than there were back then, by far. And they're mostly academic related. They're university related. And they're all under the guise of a sort of community nonprofit 501(c)(3) front, right? To bring mental health care. And that's what they're going to do. The refugees that are being evacuated from Afghanistan, they're going to put them right into mental health care treatment centers. And you know what they're going to be doing there, don't you? Yeah, they're going to create a whole new generation of mind droids using the advances in neuroscience. You're way ahead of me. You know where I'm going with all this, right? But it's important to share the specific information so that people don't think we're just blowing smoke up people's pants leg, right? Okay, so you know about George H.W. Bush, you know about Barama and his brain initiative, but there's something else here. Can I mention this because some people think that, oh yeah, I know all about MKUltra. I'm an expert on it. I can give talks on it. I can call myself a researcher on MKUltra because I read all the books on it. Well, you probably missed this one, right? You didn't know that that psychosurgery is alive and well, even after they said it was done. In fact, I will go so far here and now to argue that the so-called church committee hearings of these are congressional hearings called by Frank Church, Senator Frank Church, who's a liberal in good standing, good individual back when there were more congressmen in both houses to be found. At least I thought so. Maybe they're all crooked like they are today and bought out. But it seemed there were a larger number of these people. Okay, Church Committee, 1975-76. This is where all this MKUltra information supposedly was brought out, right? You know all that. But I'm saying it was a limited hangout. It was a limited hangout for these behavioral engineering programs that were going to be put into mothballs anyway. They were going out. So they said, well, let's make ourselves transparent in today's language, right? And put this out here, and we'll also get some votes, and we'll hold the little assassination gun, and we'll have some CIA high-level administrators to talk about what they were doing, 40 years ago, or maybe in the 40s and 50s, right after World War II, or even during World War II, right? So they were mothballed anyway. So where did the money go? Well, it went into what's called split brain research, right? Psychosurgery. That's where you know what a brain looks like, right? They sever the corpus callosum, I think it's called. I'm simplifying it right here. But this is where these insights about the left brain, right brain, it became pop magazine fodder. There's a creative side and there's a rational. I don't need to go into that. But there was a lot of money that went into it. It's nothing but psychosurgery. Right, but this is a surgical intervention. What if you were able to do this through programming the brain itself, or reprogramming at birth, or maybe even in the embryo? Or maybe you can put in certain types of, and I'm not going to say how they introduce it into the body. You can infer that, right? Maybe they can introduce that into the entire population under the guise of it being protection against some sort of alien virus from outer space, right? And maybe there's that duplex or triplex or quadruplex intention going on here. So split brain research, which is following the MKUltra and the psychosurgery, all the money went into there. And then, of course, you've got a whole timeline. I'm going to put these articles, by the way, because I'm not giving it justice. I'm going to put them on my Patreon. If you want to get them, then kick in $5 and then get the articles and then quit. No, I'd like you to stay on here because It allows me to get into some hardware and to experiment. I'm going to be doing some sound frequencies experimentation as well, because this works both ways, right? You can do all this stuff to us, Mr. Science, right? Mr. Wizard, Mr. Neuroscience, but we're not going to just sit here and accept your sawtooth waves being implanted into our consciousness. Anyway, thank you in advance for subscribing to my Patreon. I'm gonna be start doing some music. I got to figure out how to post it on here, and it's gonna take some time and money to learn all this stuff. Anyway, so I'll post some of these articles that you can read about the split brain research and also neuroscience. And you've already read the MK Ultra stuff, so I don't need to do that. So what we have moved then from the early days, right, is move into implanted memory. But before I conclude with implanted memory, this falls on the heels comes on the heels of the so-called false memory scare of the 80s. There were all these accusations of child abuse, sex abuse that came out of most particularly, I remember this well, the McMartin's preschool trial in the Manhattan Beach, California. This was in the mid 80s, late 80s. And after that came this reaction called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. This is where it's argued that certain perceptions of children could be implanted or not implanted, but conditioned or transferred through suggestion, resulting in false accusations of people who have nothing to do with the crimes they're being accused of. So it was founded, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was founded in 1992, and it just ended, I found it. It was disbanded in 2019. So that tells me, okay, we don't have to deal with false memory syndrome, because why? Maybe the whole therapeutic or the therapist-induced false memories are being done away with. That program is being mothballed. Now we're getting into implanted memory of the neuroscience sort. So you see the timeline that I haven't covered tends to validate many of my arguments here. So False Memory Syndrome Foundation, kaput, 2019. Enter implanted memory. Here are two scientists from MIT, right? Remember MIT? You should, after watching the news and sifting through all the research from the incredible Osprey Nation for the past 2 years, and in the case of George Webb, almost 5 years, right? So MIT looms large, and as do all these other research institutions that keep coming up over and over again, right? MIT, here's the headline. In Smithsonian Magazine, dated November 2014, not that long ago, the headline, meet the two scientists who implanted, I'll start again. I'm rushing here, so I'm tripping over my own tongue. Meet the two scientists who implanted a false memory into a mouse. And the subtitle is, in a neuroscience breakthrough, the duo pioneered a real-life version of Inception. And that's why I went back to Inception, to see that I already saw it. And these are two grad students, right? Grad students are the ones that have all the big ideas, ladies and gentlemen. By the time you read about these characters who are up front and taking the glory and sometimes the blame, like this Charles Lieber at Harvard, who was arrested, as bad as they are, they have tons of grad students who come up with the discoveries. In this case, I don't know, MIT decided to let the grad students take the credit for it. Typically, they'll give it to a senior scientist, or the senior scientist, the person that they're working under for their dissertation work, their doctoral work, their sponsor, in fact, will take the credit for it. And if that particular professor gets a patent out of it, then that goes to the university. If the professor doesn't want to give up the patent, then he dies, he gets murdered. And that's one of the reasons why you have a long list of people in academia, researchers or professors, who are dying. They're not people who necessarily know too much. Those are people who own patents that the universities want, because we're talking about organized crime here, right? You know this by now. laundered through this image of what the collegiate Gothic system has yielded to us here in 2021. So we know that on a small level, these two grad students implanted a false memory into Stuart Little, right? And I love mice. I talk about mice all the time in my previous talks. I talk about mice and rodents as being, and primates as being the fodder for these experiments along with human beings, right? So it makes sense. MIT is still doing it. Animal and human experimentation is live and well. So here's the point I'm going to be making. In case I run out of time, I want to make sure that you understand my conclusion about the so-called Mandela Effect. It's not simply a psyop to play with our memory. It's not just simply a game. What the Mandela Effect is doing is to demonstrate the fallibility of human memory and animal memory, but the fallibility of memory. It's faulty. It's inherently faulty. We misremember, we overremember, we non-remember. It's called forgetting. It's fallible. All right. So what it's doing is to turn over that. I don't think it's a weakness. I think the lack of memory or misreading or misunderstanding is itself an important creative ability of the human mind. Forgetting and misremembering, I do that all the time, but sometimes it leads me into very productive areas, maybe even more productive than otherwise, instead of just reading from the script, right? And I think that is why the Mandela Effect is being put into play in the popular audience, but also, as I told you, at these top research institutions, because what the Mandela Effect as proof of concept will usher in, or not usher in, it's already been ushered in, right? It's called CNN and Fox News and the New York Times, right? What it is going to be putting forward is like the CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Compost. It's going to be pushing further the post-fact agenda, the post-truth zeitgeist. It's going to be an implantable truth, right? The whole distinction between truth and false will go away, right? And that's already been achieved in the humanities with post-structuralist theory, and I won't go into it. So in the case of the humanities, all your SJW professors who are now moving wholesale into so-called critical race theory, they did that for 30 or 40 years. It's run its course, right? And that is to destroy any notion of facticity and truth. It's all contingent, it's social, right? And now we're going to biosocial truths. And that's what the Mandela Effect is going to be pushing us into. And we're going to have to do our damnedest to figure out how to resist it. It's a lot easier to see someone with a scalpel coming at you to cut your corpus callosum in half so that you will have a bifurcated, dissociated brain. And by the way, this is another discussion, but a lot of people are arguing that intelligence and consciousness and self doesn't even reside in the brain. It resides outside of the body, but they don't care because that's not really their lookout. They're interested in controlling what they can control, which is information, facts, and experience, and also the emotive capacity of human beings and of our dear animal friends as well. Remember, if they're hurting us, they're hurting animals. They're hurting animals. They're hurting us as well, because we're on that same continuum. So the cognitive sciences are working toward that end of jacking the emotions, the affective aspect of our human existence. So I will leave you with this to show you how cynical it has gotten so far, from George Bush declaring the decade of the brain, and then Barama saying, yeah, it's going to be the brain initiative. It doesn't take very long, ladies and gentlemen, with this implanted memory, post-truth zeitgeist. We have something called a neuromarketing. So we've gone from the consumer society of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and even through the 80s. There's a lot of literature on consumer society, right? The disposable society. And everybody was living high on the hog, right? Now we're in the society of scarcity. That's the eco-green people. And from there, we're being told to pull back. But now, and that itself was also an entry point into neuro society, where everything, you're not going to consume anything. It's all going to be given to you, perhaps on a mini SD chip. So there's something called consumer neuroscience. Here it is. I'm at the top of the hour, so I'm going to read real quick. Consumer neuroscience, assessing the brain response to marketing stimuli using electroencephalogram, EEG, and eye tracking. I won't give you the bona fides, but they come from top universities, mostly from business. And business, the MBA types, the business schools are merging, if they haven't already, with neuroscience. They're all merging with neuroscience. Even the humanities are merging with it. It's going to be a monolithic neuroscientific brain science university. And that's one of the reasons why it's being destroyed, so that they can restructure it. They can reset it along these lines. Another article before I end, consumer neuroscience, assessing, I'm sorry, I already did that. Last one, false memories of autobiographical events can be reversed. Rich false memories of autobiographical events can be reversed. So your reality is no longer your own. It's going to be workshopped and programmed for us. And maybe that is but one of the underlying vectors in this current attempt to force us into this, regime, right? Courtesy of the NIH and Dr. Faustus and the likes. So I hope you gleaned some insights here and maybe some fruitful areas for your own research. I especially want to know about your gamehead world, and I mean gamehead in the most affectionate way possible. I think it's fascinating. I'd like to know more about Christopher Nolan biographically. Thank you, Eddie Phillips, for thanking me. Zoga Nostra Nostra, it never was. I guess it won't be. Yeah, it'll be a total mind wipe. All right, I'm going to end at that. ECAT, how are you doing? Thank you. I'm going to end, and we'll see you again. And I'm going to be posting that 4-minute audio piece maybe later today. I'll see you again Thursday, and we got the Thursday trio to look forward to. Maybe George Webb will be back in the studio. Maybe he'll be off the road, and I got a lot of questions for him, because I agree with him. Everything else is secondary. Number one, front and center, is the looming danger ahead, without going into specifics. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Peace.